Welcome everyone to the SPA panel discussion, Physiotherapy During a Pandemic. Please know that the SPA AGM has been rescheduled to June 20th. Today we are going to start with our panel discussion, and then we're going to move on to a presentation and question and answer session about personal protective equipment and clinic sanitization. I'm very excited to introduce you to our three panelists that have joined us today. Jeremy McAllister graduated in 1996 from UBC and worked in a variety of physiotherapy-related contexts, including clinical work, academia, and management. Jeremy undertook the UBC's Health Administration program in 2020 to 2014, and it was here that he developed an interest in digital health and its application to rehabilitation. In 2018 and 19, he was project manager for UBC's Program for Excellence in Telerehabilitation Education and Research. He currently works as a clinician, digital health consultant to various organizations across Canada, and the Physiotherapy Association of BC's eHealth manager. Natasha Wilch has been providing telehealth services through her clinic Symphony Rehabilitation in BC since 2017. She is passionate in what telehealth can offer clients, and that passion, along with being one of the first clinics in Canada to offer the services, led her to winning Entrepreneur of the Year for Canada in 2017. Today, with closing the clinic doors, Natasha recognized the need for clinic owners and clinicians in needing to transition their clinics to online space. Wanting to support allied health and ensure proper steps were taken, Natasha created a course, Launching Your Telehealth Practice, to do just that. Today, she has supported and trained hundreds of clinic owners across the country in shifting their clinics to the telehealth world. And also joining us today, Greg Sutton, the co-founder and CEO of TinyEYE Therapy Services from right here in Saskatoon. TinyEYE is the first company in the world to provide speech-language pathology services online. Greg and his sister and business partner, Marnie Brick, have taken their company from being a small startup to emerging as the world leader in online speech therapy, providing services in 12 countries and 5 languages. It is TinyEye's vision to be the #1 advocate for the world in children finding their voice. All right, so let's get started. So first off, I'm going to pose a question for everybody here. Can you describe your observations and perceptions on how physiotherapy practice has changed in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic? And let's start with you, Jeremy.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. Good to be here and talk to all of you. The rapid transition certainly has been fascinating in BC. I think my major observation is realizing and seen some clarity develop on what foundations we have in place for telehealth and virtual care, and what the gaps still are. So foundations we've had for quite a while, actually. There's telehealth and rehabilitation isn't brand new. We've been seeing research on this for 20 years. And we've seen that we can do this technically. We can see it's effective. We can see in the research that there's evidence for assessment. We can see it has cost benefits. But the gaps have always been the awareness of its existence, and then also the trust that funders and referral sources will put into us, or put into the work, that it can be done effectively. And so what we're seeing now is that awareness really start to develop, and we're seeing where the limitations of trust are. Those are really my observations on the transition that has occurred.
Interesting, thank you. And actually, I wanted to just make a note to everybody that's joined us, all the participants. Please feel free to send questions in the question area of the GoToWebinar panel. So you can submit questions, and we'll definitely take questions from the audience. So please join in. We won't open the audio. We have over 100 people registered today, and it'll be too difficult to manage the audio. But if you submit them, I will pose the questions to our panelists. All right, so back to our question here. Observations and perceptions on how therapy practice has changed in the context of COVID-19. So Greg, can you share some perceptions and more in the OT and speech field? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So traditionally pre-COVID, we were delivering therapy to schools throughout North America and around the world. And we were seeing about 4,100 kids every week in bricks and mortar buildings. And that stopped on March 16th, roughly. And so we've been working to try and transfer them all to home therapy so they can get the same service, but at home. And it sounds easy on paper, but we've in the month so far, we're about 1,200 kids have started at home receiving therapy, and there's all sorts of logistical challenges. A lot of the homes that we're serving in those communities, they don't have technology there, or the bandwidth isn't there in the far north or in the outlying regions. And then the schools don't have accurate contact information for the parents, and there's all sorts of things like that that's been hindering kids from receiving services. When they do get it, it's working very well. I think we're seeing as well, like it's kind of an inflection point in the world where people are saying, hey, you know what, how we did things isn't going to work, and maybe we don't need to go back to that, but what are we doing now? How are we doing this? And I think there's people like Jeremy and Natasha who've got some best practices and are implementing it and building on a solid foundation. And then there's people that are just winging it and not really thinking it through, and then some people are having bad experiences with telehealth, and there's a dichotomy of two experiences the world's having right now. Is this is helping, saving, I can work from home, see my clients from home, and clients experience it, this is great, this is the best thing, and this is the worst thing, I wouldn't pay for this. And I think as an industry, in each of our professions, we really have to manage the quality of what we do. And in speech, it has to be equivalent or better for us to be able to go forward with what we're doing. And so that's what we're seeing is some of that fluctuation. We're in the messy middle right now, and people are just trying to get their heads around it. So I'll yield there.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Natasha, can you share your perspectives and observations?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different things. I think we said before earlier, the awareness that Jeremy talked about, like when we started doing telehealth before, there was no identifying, like if you ask someone what telehealth was, even within our own profession, there was multiple definitions. No one was really on a universal plane of here's what telehealth is, here's what this means. And so what this has done is, with COVID happening, there is definitely an awareness and a recognition of when someone says telehealth, it's now understood, at least in our professions, what that means and how that provides a service delivery. What I will say is, and I think it was Trevor Russell who I heard say, it's not that the public wasn't ready for telehealth, it's that the therapists weren't ready for telehealth. And even in the clinic owners that I've had the chance to communicate with, so many of them didn't think they'd be able to do this. They've full on said, like, before I started this, Natasha, like before we worked, I thought this would work for maybe 20% of my clients. And so there is this opening and this excitement that I'm also seeing, that therapists are realizing there's other ways to serve their clients that are as effective as using their hands or being in their clinics. So for me, it's this mix of there's this excitement, this awareness, this growth, and therefore for me, the way I look at things, it's potential for what it can do for all our professions going forward as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Jeremy, you mentioned a little bit about your work with third-party insurers. Can you tell us about the experiences you've had with third-party insurers in coordinating the funding of telerehabilitation services in BC?
Yeah, so a very big difference from pre-COVID to post-COVID. So we actually, well, not post-COVID, we're in mid-COVID, aren't we? I wish it was post-COVID, but Natasha and I and others have been working on trying to get funding in BC, both with our sort of more local insurers and for the national insurers for telehealth services for a number of years. And in fact, we put together some of the research a few years back as an association, presented it to some of the major insurers, Great West Life, Sun Life, Blue Cross, as a few and a couple of others, and had variable responses. Actually, some of the responses were almost amusing and betrayed a little bit of the knowledge of some funders as to what we actually do. But we did have some great response from Great West Life. I will definitely give them some kudos, because they responded pretty quickly and were willing to cover telehealth sessions even from a few years ago. That was really the major one that was formally covering sessions. There was a certain degree of services that were being provided, and then we would just write on the receipts provided by Telerehabilitation or something to that effect. And those were often being covered as well. So it was kind of a little bit of a gray area. There was some formality. There were anecdotal reports of ICBC and WorkSafe covering it when requested specifically, but really it was tough to make any inroads on it. And then of course, once the patients started calling about it, once COVID hit, that's when things really started to change. And we had a really intense few weeks, mid-March to beginning of April, where I was in discussions almost every day with funders. So right now, we've come around to where we have a number of the major insured carriers covering it. Great West, of course, Sun Life, Blue Cross, at least for treatments. WorkSafe is now allowing quite a bit of work in BC. That took a little bit of work, but they are certainly stepping up for that. ICBC, our motor vehicle accident insurer, has been very proactive and very responsive to providing care, and pretty much we can do assessments, treatments, and carry on regular care with our motor vehicle accident clients. So it's been overall very positive, and a lot of inroads made. And I think, like Natasha says, there will probably be some pullbacks, but I think we're in a much better spot right now, insurance-wise. And what Greg said there about the double-edged sword of having this moment in time where services are required, but we have a lot of people getting into them that really maybe think a little bit too little about the quality side of things. That's what we really have to be careful with right now to sustain that funding going forward, I think.
Yes, very good point. The quality side of things is very critical. Natasha, Greg, do you have any comments on the quality piece?
The quality piece was so Jeremy and I go back quite a few years, and we've communicated throughout this whole thing, and the quality piece was actually the reason I built the course. Yeah. You know, this telehealth is something that we've looked into and loved for the last few years, and we knew that going forward from this, when COVID hit and we had to close our doors, that there was going to be a lot of people jumping onto the telehealth train to offer services. But there's more to it than being able to jump on FaceTime or Skype and just do a call. And so right now we're in this bubble of time that funders are approving things, and we want to use this as an opportunity to highlight the quality and the delivery we can do, which means we needed to do it properly. And the considerations that need to be factored into when executing telehealth as a clinic. So that quality piece was one of the major reasons why the course I built was actually built, so that we could ensure there was a foundation and there was a procedure, and people were thinking through all of the steps that needed to be thought through instead of just winging on and pulling up FaceTime on their cell phone. Because if we're going to continue to get support for this going forward, we need to know as professions that we have a standard we're living up to. So.
Super. Okay. So Greg, well, and just to help the audience understand the magnitude of the quality in the therapists that you're working with, how many virtual therapists do you have that are working with TinyEYE? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, there's around 250 therapists on our team, and we've delivered around 700,000 sessions to 25,000 kids.
Wow.
And so we've got a lot of we've got a corporate team as well. So we've got software developers and quality assurance and logistics and marketing and sales and all the things to run the business. But we spend a lot of money on the quality assurance. So we have our sessions are monitored. We have a whole bunch of little things we do to analyze the data to make sure the quality levels are there, including, you know, the amount of light that's being used in the session. Are they backlit? Are they front lit? Is their head like, if I go here, are they talking like this the whole time to the kid? Is it, you know, or just those kind of little things. And we have a checklist of about 28 different points that each have subpoints to them. And then our therapists are all audited. In their first year, they're audited monthly, and then as they go on, it's less frequent because they're doing well and have good practices with it. But we've found that when you actually work towards having good quality, you have great customer retention, and yet all the outcomes for the patients or the kids skyrocket. And we've had great results with our kids. We did a study with Kent State University. This is a few years back, where they did a control group of they had about 40 kids doing traditional speech therapy, and then they had about 40 kids doing telehealth on our platform. And over the, I think it was a 3 or 4 month period, the kids in the traditional model, they had 47% of them mastered their IEP goals, or their essentially their therapy goals. And in our group, 83% mastered their goals. And so the level was almost double of achievement. And we looked into what really drove that, and it was the engagement of both the therapist and the child. And as you know, when you engage your client and you're passionate and driven, and they're excited to make progress, things are going to happen. And so having that as one of the fundamental principles of our platform and how we do things, and the quality is engagement is critical. It's not just a side effect. It's, you have to work harder in an online environment to engage, and you have to be more intentional perhaps about it. Anyways, I'll yield there.
Well, thank you. Yes, definitely some interesting research and focus. And with that many therapists, you can see how the quality program and quality assurance program would be critical. Okay, so I have a question from the floor here, Natasha. Do you have any recommendations for quality assessments specifically?
As in how to do a quality assessment?
Yes, yeah, the actual objective component of assessments.
Yeah, so I mean, if I talk through kind of the whole assessment too, it's your first part is always your subjective history, right? And I think as therapists, sometimes we get so used to jumping to what our hands give us that we forget the importance of the actual subjective history. I mean, ideally with those questions, by the time you're done that history, you have a solid idea of what the issue your client is dealing with. And then the rest of your assessment either confirms or disproves your theory. And so assessment-wise, it's important to think of the things that you would normally do in your own assessment that don't actually require your hands to begin with. And I'm saying hands because a lot of physios, and the physios I think that have had more struggle are our ones that are more manual therapists. And so what are the things that you do in an assessment that don't use your hands to begin with? So you look at posture, you look at gait, you look at breath, you look at all these things, and do you have the ability, with client consent of course, do you take video? Do you take a screenshot and then use those things to also assess, but then to help educate the client on what you're seeing and treating as well? Looking at things like subjective client questionnaires, like you would use those in your clinic, so don't forget to use those in a telehealth medium. It could be that you send those out beforehand. It could be so that you do a screen share and work through it with them in the assessment itself. I use some app-based objective outcome measures. So I work a lot with the concussion and the neurological population, and so I use a system called EQ Brain Performance, and it's an FDA-approved app-based app that has a dashboard that I can see all the data. So it takes my client through balance, it takes them through trail making, it takes them through memory delayed, it takes them through rapid scanning, and it measures how they do. It gives a subjective questionnaire as well, and then it's uploaded to a dashboard so that I can see how they do. So I can track their outcomes, I can see trends over time. There's something else called Cambridge Brain Sciences, which is a validated cognitive assessment. Same thing. So you have to look at pulling in things that you might not normally do in your clinic if you've been more hands-on paper-based, that still let you get those objective measures. I think the important thing with switching to telehealth sometimes is to realize you can't take exactly what you did and now plop it behind a computer screen. You need to be open to adapting and learning new ways to gather the information that you're doing.
Great, thank you. And Jeremy, you have a wide breadth of both clinical experience and research, and then helping with program development. Do you have any recommendations on specifically that telehealth objective assessment in terms of quality?
Yeah, I'll comment on evaluating your quality, and so that comes back to what Natasha was speaking about, using outcome measures. So we build we're primarily dealing with musculoskeletal population. We use PhysiTrack, which some of your group may be familiar with. We use it quite extensively, and built into that is an outcome measure. So outcome measure system, and then we also do just a standard how likely are you to recommend this therapy to others scale post-treatment. So you get sort of a client feedback, and then you also get a functional outcome evaluating the quality of what you're doing. It's interesting, actually, there's been a lot of effort to integrate over the years outcome measures through photo and other ways, paper-based. And when you're actually in the telehealth world, it becomes much easier. You just build it into your digital workflow. And some of the tools you're using for telehealth actually include these in there. So using a program like PhysiTrack makes that very easy, we find, to actually monitor our quality in a more thorough and consistent way.
Great, thank you. All right, so switching gears a little bit here. Greg, in order to offer telehealth services, physiotherapists are required to comply with several security requirements. With all of the security issues in the media, and seems to be increased risks and more, I guess, cyber threats and risks during COVID, this can be a daunting task. What advice do you have for physiotherapists assessing platforms and setting up their internal processes to ensure safe environments, balancing cost effectiveness?
Greg, we're done practice.
Sorry, I just had some of the kids running around. So that's a really good question, and it takes a real balanced approach, because there's nothing in this world on the internet that is 100% completely secure. That doesn't exist. But at the same time, in your office, in your filing cabinet, that isn't secure either. Someone can throw a brick through your window, hop in, grab all the files out, and go. And that's actually much less secure than the digital world. The paper world, nobody seems to worry about and all that, but it's way less secure than any of the digital elements. And it's kind of having that perspective. So what they look for, and we've studied a lot of the case studies where people have been charged, where there's been health information breaches and things like that. And what they usually look at is how well did you do your due diligence, how much your best effort to protect the stuff. So does your computer have a password on it, all those kind of things. So just in case you've got client records there, your computer gets stolen, they can't get in, or they have to go through extreme measures to hack in. And so for yourself, no matter what you're doing, make your best efforts to protect all the things you've got. In terms of the platforms, they're constantly in change under the HIPAA and PIPEDA. Those are also kind of best effort regards, where you can use Skype, you can use Zoom, you can use all of those in the right environment. So you can't use them if you're in a coffee shop and people can see. You can't, those types of things from what we've found. And we've built our own platform, and it's very secure. It's more secure than it needs to be, but it's because we built it, we had the ability to do that. So what I would recommend in evaluating it is make sure all your surroundings, all the environment, all the things you're doing to support yourself, you've taken every step to be responsible to protect the information and protect your patients. And that's what I would say. You can't be the specialist as a technologist. The Zoom company, the Skypes, those guys, they have to do that. That's what they do. But you have to manage what you're receiving, and that's yeah, so that's my ditty on that.
Did we lose Garnet?
Sorry, I was on mute there. Sorry about that. Okay, we have some several questions coming in from the floor here. I've got one here. Do you find telehealth takes longer to assess because so much communication is required, or is it more a learning curve for therapists that get faster as we adapt our assessments? So, Natasha, do you have some ideas on that in terms of the time?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. So there is definitely a learning curve as you're transitioning from hands-on to telehealth, for sure. I mean, you think of in clinic, you need to explain what you're doing, but you don't need to demonstrate and explain. And anytime you're doing a telehealth assessment, there is that extra step of you need to explain it, but you need to demonstrate it clearly for the client as well, so they know exactly what you're asking. And then you also need to guide them through the moment itself. So in a clinic, for example, if you take palpation, you're gonna say, I'm gonna palpate the muscle, and this is what I'm feeling for. In telehealth, you're gonna say, here's how you palpate. You use the pads of your fingers, you're gonna put it on your muscle, and you're gonna demonstrate and guide it. So in the beginning, there's absolutely a learning curve to even wrapping around yourself. How do you put to words what you do so naturally now? So that's one piece that requires practice from the therapist. And then the second piece is there is definitely a layered time piece, especially in those first few sessions. Once you explain to someone how to palpate once or twice, you're not going to have to do it every session. But in the assessment, yes, you have to factor in my experience, a little bit of extra time to kind of guide through those things, especially in that beginning stage. Yeah. So Great. Just so you know too, so for us, new assessments, we do 60 minutes for a new assessment, and we do 30 minutes for a follow-up. So that is where, so if a typical orthopedic clinic, if they were operating on shorter time frames, in the beginning, my recommendation to someone who's new is always book longer appointments than you would have in the clinic, at least in that beginning, and then leave yourself a bit of a gap because you're going to run into technical snafus, at least in that beginning as well. And then you get to a point where you can book back to back, which is what I do at this point. But in that beginning, you need to leave yourself some extra time.
Great, thank you, Natasha. Jeremy, what are you seeing in terms of clinics and time for the telehealth sessions?
Well, I was just sitting here nodding with Natasha because what she described is pretty much exactly the way I would have described it in terms of time. Pretty much a little bit of both a learning curve and extra time required because of those demonstration, using the patient as your hands and having to describe that when you're converting your musculoskeletal assessment to a virtual one. You know, there's also extra time that you're probably going to take with your subjective history. So you're going to have some limitations because it's just a matter of fact your musculoskeletal assessment is going to have to be modified. There's going to be some things you just can't do as well. But it's amazing how much redundancy there is in our assessments and how much we can use that subjective history to capture some of that information we would have got from that musculoskeletal assessment points. So yeah, completely agree with Natasha's description. We also 60 minutes for an assessment. We do build a 40-minute follow-up, but mostly that's because just some of the stuff we do afterwards, rebook the next appointment, look at our outcome measures. That's when we do a lot of our administrative work in that extra bit too.
Okay, thank you. All right, so another question here from the floor. Where's the line of complexity of assessment and treatment that is suitable for telemedicine? To protect the integrity of telerehabilitation, when is it irresponsible to suggest the quality of face-to-face and telemedicine assessments are equal? Some very complex assessments where the direct face-to-face assessments, so example, neurological and serious pathology assessment, are required. How do you ensure a proper assessment to protect both you on regulatory complaints and the patient for fair adjudication? For example, should it be used for higher stakes multidisciplinary assessments where fair insurance adjudication is required? Do you want to tackle that one, Jeremy?
Well, there's about 4 or 5 questions there. Can we take one of them?
Yes, yeah, for sure. Okay, so where's the line of complexity of assessment and treatment that is suitable for telemedicine?
Yeah, I think where we're at is the line has to be drawn by the research. There's, I'm not sure we can draw a line. I think we need to be careful of saying there is a particular line. We're going to have to really trust clinical judgment, and I think it is getting to the point where physios are trusted a little bit more in their clinical judgment. But having said that, we can use the research as the foundation, and we can see, and my experience is MSK, so my comments will be MSK, but we can see from a fair bit of the research that we can get to a substantially the same bottom line of diagnosis from a telehealth assessment using most regions of the body. Now, there is going to be some of the weaknesses are when we get into, in the research, or when we get into doing some dynamic testing around, especially around nerve conduction, for one, will be difficult, although there are ways to do that. But things like femoral nerve stretch, straight leg raise, those kind of things where we're actually looking at the nerve gliding effect, the impingement of the nerves, ulnar nerve tension, these kind of things where the research falls down a little bit with that, finding that there's less consistency around our ability to reproduce those. But even those are being addressed. And I think it's a matter of time where we come up with different ways of doing that. And that comes back a little bit to Natasha was discussing the quality of what we're doing. Those kind of things are going to take some training and some courses, some understanding on what's being done. I think what we're looking to now is, as we look to improving the quality of what we're doing in those assessments so that we can sort of better draw that line, is we're looking to a lot of what they've done in Australia, where they have protocols for these kind of things, and trying to get a little bit more definitive on how we actually reproduce all these things rather than just using our intuition and creativity and judgment, or the intuition and creativity part anyway, as our only basis. We'd like some protocols and some systematic nature to it. So I think I may have gone off the question a little bit there, but in terms of drawing the line, it's got to be based on the research, I think.
Mm-hmm. And have you had any interactions or experiences where there's adjudications that are relating to third-party insurers? Have you seen any situations where there's decision making around whether telehealth assessments or evaluations can be used in those types of situations where there could be fairly high stakes to the patient?
No, third-party insurers really haven't been involved in telehealth up until the last 6 weeks. So we, and at least in our practice, in the private practice musculoskeletal world, so haven't seen that yet.
Okay. Greg, have you had any of those with children? Probably not so much, but have you seen any thing in your many years of telehealth?
Yeah. So, well, in regards to 2 parts of that, where's the line where it's fuzzy, and I support Jeremy on that. That's use the research, but then you can't categorically deny one level of patient or one type of disorder, because the person who you're working with, one might be really good at following your instructions and the other one can't. Or you can get someone might have really great case history and the other one doesn't, and it's really hard to categorically say, can we do this type of assessment or that type of assessment. I think it's very much based on the individual client and the clinician and what skills and those kinds of things. And I think we've seen over the last 15 years, certain regions have said, okay, you can do online therapy, but you can't do assessments. And then it prevents a whole bunch of kids from receiving therapy because you need that initial assessment. And as an industry, I'd really encourage you to be careful to not ponder that question so much as the question of how do we make each client have a great experience, or those types of questions. And that's where I'd see with that. On the insurance side of things, we don't deal a lot with insurance. The schools are who pay us, and they have compliance is what their issue is. And in the U.S., if a student, if their IEP says they get 30 sessions and they don't get 30 sessions, the parents can and do sue the schools. And so we have to make sure that every session is counted, and if the kid's sick for 6 weeks, we still have to get those sessions made up and making some of those kind of things. And it's just a lot of data tracking and management that helps aid and support that.
Thanks.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so sort of focusing on the how versus the line kind of thing. Natasha, do you have any comments to add to those sort of higher stakes assessments?
I mean, again, agreeing with both Jeremy and Greg that the research can be our guide, and there is research supporting. So she specifically, or the question specifically mentioned neurological stuff too. And, you know, there is research supporting telerehabilitation for stroke rehab and for vestibular rehab. That research is there. Like the most recent Cochrane review for a stroke rehab demonstrated that, in their lovely language, was that telerehabilitation was no worse than receiving in-person care. I was like, okay. Same thing. It was the same findings with the vestibular case. There's been research. You're seeing research across the domains. There's in nursing, looking at, and it's in nursing. It's in like post-cancer, and there's support for telehealth in the post-cancer population and gaining functional capacities back. So it's amazing to, and we're going to, I think after this too, we're going to continue to see the research. This goes back to, you know, when you're looking at your skill as a clinician too, you're not going to be able to do what you always did. I'm a BOBAth certified practitioner for neurology. I can't do a BOBAth assessment through telehealth. It's not possible. But are there other things I know in my neural toolbox, in my toolbox as a therapist, that can help me assess that client? And are there other tools besides using my facilitation skills as a BOBAth therapist to then treat that complex client? And my answer to that would be yes. Again, though, that's where you have outcomes to track your decisions and help you determine if you're having a positive impact on this person's life as well. And the other piece too is that, I'm going on a tangent, so I'll stop after this comment. Looking at that biopsychosocial model, I think, is really important, because the person is more than their diagnosis. They are more than their shoulder. They are more than their stroke. So for some people, being able to do telehealth gives them more one-on-one time with a client. So are you able to identify something within their life that you might not have actually done, so you've done them a greater service, whether that's just connecting them with a different professional or whether that lets you approach your care in a different way.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the audience for sending in lots of great questions here. So the next question here, in regards to your comment that we can't do virtual therapy at, for example, a coffee shop, do you have suggestions for how to navigate the privacy aspect for gait assessments in care facilities, where typically in person this would be done in a hallway or with other residents passing by? So if I can summarize my thoughts on the question here, it would, so if you wanted to do a gait assessment, you would have to, they're comparing it to in-person and telehealth. So, I mean, it's not completely private if you're doing this in person, but maybe from a telehealth standpoint, what if you wanted to do a gait assessment and they had maybe someone helping them to videotape their gait? And privacy around that, because you'd have to be, I guess, on a virtual, like a Wi-Fi that might not be private.
So I interpreted that.
Yeah, sorry.
I said I interpret that question a bit differently, in the sense of the privacy piece. So the way I interpreted that question was, like Greg's example was, we couldn't be in a coffee shop doing the telehealth session because the client has no control over their privacy of who's around us. If the client is in an environment, and so if we secure our privacy so there's no one around us, but the client is in an environment that they are comfortable with the people around, then that is their consent to do that. But if we're in a coffee shop, they can't consent to and have no control over who sees their case. So that's how I interpreted that question.
That makes more sense. Let's go with your interpretation. Yeah.
Did I also just kind of answer it?
Yeah. So your thought is that if they are in a more public area, and if people could view them, similar to the face-to-face person viewing someone walking in a hallway. Greg, what are your thoughts on the potential internet connectivity or the potential of intercepting that?
That's so on the internet, the Wi-Fi, like again, nothing is 100% secure. And as long as you make the intention, you can have a secure connection over a public Wi-Fi if you're using like a lot of the technologies. The one we're on right now, I believe is HIPAA compliant and so on. And so as long as you make that intention to do it securely, I think you're all right. In reality, like in our world, nobody, as much as we think we're awesome, nobody really cares about our therapists and wants to see them treating a little kid. Like there's not a hacker in the world that's got that as their thing they want to try and get. Maybe there is, but I doubt it. But we've made all the what you would perceive to be steps to protect that person in that environment. And with Natasha stating, you know, the person who's receiving therapy has to consent. And if they've consented to do it in this environment and they understand that maybe their sister or brother are watching, or someone in their care home is watching, someone down the hall, they're probably going to be okay. We've used telepresent robots in schools, and they're essentially like an iPad on a Segway with a telescopic stick, and we can drive them around the schools and observe kids doing social interactions, go into the classrooms and watch teachers and do much more of observational type of work with the kids. And it's gone amazingly well. The hard part is keeping the kids away from the robot, because they kids and robots, parents, adults and robots too, find it very, very engaging. And we haven't had any issues or problems. We've had lots of encouragement from that. So I think, again, making sure your environment's secure, that people can't see who the person you're treating doesn't know are watching, and then getting consent for their environment is critical. And then the Wi-Fi and whatnot, make sure you've done the due diligence. But it's not easy to pipe in and steal someone's internet connection and hack in, but it's also not hard if that's what you do for a living. So I'll just leave it at that, I guess. I don't. It's kind of a vague answer, but I'll
Thank you. All right, and next question here. Do you know if there are any general examples of an orthopedic assessment delivered by telehealth that could be viewed online to give us a guideline? Just like the question bumped here. To give us a guideline and help us learn if we're just starting this process. So Natasha, you've helped some clinicians learn. Have you seen anything where they can see some examples?
Yeah, so I've never videoed any of my own, but there is a Facebook group that has, and they have, it's not free, they have a membership option that has basically a catalog, and I can send you the name after, because I can't remember it, but that has a catalog of orthopedic assessments that practitioners have done via telehealth to give you some ideas. It's a group out of the States. Beyond them, I haven't seen any like demonstrations of assessments. I don't know, Jeremy, have you?
I would suggest, and I always suggest that as a primer on telerehab, everybody goes and watches Trevor Russell's 1-hour webinar recorded by the Alberta Physio Association in college. Absolutely a great, just bottom line sort of a webinar that talks about everything from some of the basic technology to actually the research that they do at the University of Queensland, and it really gives you a good sense of some of the studies they've done, how they convert some of their assessments. I think that's the best information I can recommend. So if you Google Trevor Russell, Alberta Physio Association Telerehabilitation, you'll get the webinar pretty quickly.
Great, thank you. All right, and next question here. What are the top HIPAA compliant platforms that you recommend for physiotherapists?
Oh, there's a whole bunch. So here's where I'm going to do a shout out to the PABC toolkit, which I think you guys already got. There's a whole sheet where they've laid out, there's a ton of platforms, you guys, and so when you're choosing a platform, you need to choose a platform that's going to serve what you need it to do. Because there's lots of requests, but PABC has done a fabulous job about building this document that lays out a bunch of the telehealth, a bunch of the platforms. Are they physio specific? What do they give you? Are they HIPAA compliant? In there's tons out there, and there's new ones since that document's been published. Did you guys update it, Jeremy?
Just working on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's new ones as well. So I can say what I have used and still use. So I currently use Zoom Health for mine. Jane app has released a HIPAA compliant platform. Embodia has released a HIPAA compliant platform. Doxy is what I usually used before this, but then it crashed on me. But you guys are having no problems with it now, right, Jeremy?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Doxy is another one, and PhysiTrack is. They also have a HIPAA compliant telehealth platform as well. There's lots.
Just a little clarification around HIPAA, PIPEDA, PIPA, all those words. They're all referring to privacy legislation, acts of legislation, and they're region specific. So in BC, we have provincial privacy legislation. So really, all we have to abide by in the private sector anyway is the Personal Information Protection Act, PIPA, which is actually a little more lenient than some of these other acts. So really all we have to abide by, you have to be, I'm not even sure if Saskatchewan has its own privacy.
Yeah,
I think it's probably
we have the Health Information Protection Act in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, so I mean, that's, you have to look at your region. That doesn't mean that HIPAA, PIPEDA, et cetera, are not relevant terms to look for, because those terms indicate that the software platform has been developed very extensively with privacy in mind. So it's probably overdoes things for our actual PIPA compliance. But so those are just a little clarification on those terms. If something doesn't say HIPAA compliant necessarily, but it's still compliant to your region and PIPEDA compliant or something, someone's paid good attention to that. And that's one of the major differences between platforms that are actually made for telehealth and platforms that are more business or casual. Someone's really paid attention to how the data is handled in the healthcare context. So
Great.
That's a little clarification. I can't remember what question we were on, but yeah.
Thank you. All right, next question here. How do you best plan for any medical incident that might occur during a telehealth session? Example, fainting during an exercise, etc., especially if the person lives alone. So Natasha, do you want to tackle that one?
So this is before, so we talk about all this stuff in the course too, because this is one of those things that people might not think of when they just jump into doing telehealth. So the fact that that question was asked was awesome. You need to have a policies procedure in your clinic before you go jump and do telehealth, right? So you need to have these things laid out for your team so that if something like this, there's a protocol they follow when that happens. Simple things. So you always need to make sure you have emergency contact numbers on hand. You need to make sure you have, so I always say non-emergency fire and police as well, but we just clarified that 911 still works regardless of where you live. And then you need to have, so yeah, phone numbers, emergency contact, a phone number to call the client, and emergency. So if that were to happen, you stay for, so our policy, obviously, so you're trying to negate risk as much as you can as well. So I will say I treat more conservatively via telehealth than I do in my clinic, because I'm not there to support the person if I'm worried about fainting or falling. If I have a fear of what I'm doing might push someone to that level, that is when I may request that they have a family member or someone be present for the assessment themselves. So those are some of those things that go into those pre-questions of, what are you coming in with? Is this a high risk person for balance? Do I need to ask them to have someone with them to help be my extra set of hands? And an example can be, I had a client the other week who was playing a ton of vertigo. And so we planned her assessment for a time that her husband was going to be home to try to negate. I wasn't going to do balance with this woman by herself. I just didn't feel confident that she was going to be safe. So having your client's safety is paramount. If that scenario were to happen, for our policy in our clinic is you remain on the screen with that person. You do not disconnect. You call 911. You have to have their address and everything handy. So making sure you have so when Greg talks about the school not having up-to-date records, you need to make sure that client record is filled out completely. And if it's your first session with that client, you need to confirm the phone number, the address, and all those things so you know that it's accurate. So you stay on the telehealth conference with the person, you call 911, you stay on that phone with the person until the operator tells you otherwise, and however that scenario unfolds, and then you follow up with calling the emergency contact to let them know as well, and then you document. That's short notes of what our version is, but it's incredibly important that you do check those things first. You make sure and confirm them in that first session, and you have that policy, and your therapists are all very comfortable in that scenario.
Great, thank you very much. All right, I have a couple questions that are related, and they have a different approach to asking it. So first off, so the questions so far were presupposing a therapist has experience with assessing and treating prior to switching to telerehab for delivering care. What about grads who don't have experience built up and a repertoire of success and failure in a hands-on clinical setting? I'm interested in hearing comments on this scenario. And we had a very similar related question. From your experience, is it easier or more difficult for physiotherapy grads to complete a telehealth assessment given they have less dependency on their hands?
You're probably not going to like my answer on this one, to be honest. I believe, at least right now, until the education system changes in the physiotherapy schools as well, that telehealth needs to be performed by an experienced therapist. I think that you have the experience to know what something does feel like, or when someone gives you a subjective complaint and you've confirmed that, or you know what the two linked together should be. You have more clinical reasoning skills to help you work through a process, to take a more pointed subjective history to help you get to what's going on. You're more aware of when something may go haywire and not. I think as a new grad, the second question was interesting because I've never thought about it in that way, to be honest. But I do think you need to have a basis of clinical reasoning and clinical skill to fall back on in this environment, because you don't have your hands to help you collaborate things. I do think and would like to see kind of going forward that, and I've been in this discussion with other people before too, that maybe, and in Australia, I think it's part of their actual undergrad, but having, and maybe we will going forward, telehealth be in the curriculum to actually talk about this in that environment, and maybe placements include a bit of that if clinics do it. I'm not sure. But Jeremy, I'm going to let you answer that one too.
Yeah, Natasha and I have talked about this a number of times before, and we are in full agreement. I think your subjective history and the pattern of things you've seen in the past hundreds of times becomes very important to the limitations of the physical assessment. So and judgment, I keep coming back to judgment, is built over time and honed and enhanced and matured over time. So I do think it's far better, far safer, and probably far more effective to have had some experience before you get into the telehealth world. And I think that trumps the second question, which is of not having that reliance on your hands. I think the experience trumps that.
Right. All right. Do the panelists feel that they can deliver the same level of intensity of physical examination over telehealth as an in-person assessment?
What do you mean by intensity of assessment? Do I feel like I can give as effective an assessment for my clients? Yes. Sometimes there may be, at least as a starting point, sometimes there comes, I will be brutally honest, there comes a point where I really wish I had some of my diagnostic tools. And in that case, I need to evaluate how far can I serve this client via telehealth, and is this a method now where this is not the best way to deliver and we do need to bring you into the clinic. So again, I don't think there's one answer that can answer that question. I think it depends on the client, and it depends on what the goal is and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree.
All right, there was a reference to screenshots and recordings of telerehab sessions, both by patient and clinicians. This could be a great learning tool and a method of feedback to clients. How do you find clients react to the recording of sessions for future use of the clinic, sort of quality and compliance?
So I should clarify that I never record a whole session. I'll record bits of a session, but any video and photo is with explicit client consent every time that takes place. So it is in my general consent, but then I very specifically ask consent and say, I would like to take a video of your eyes. Is that okay with you? And they say yes or no. I've never asked to record a whole session to use for learning purposes. I don't know if anyone else has.
We record a lot of sessions for quality, and we do, the consent is where we cover that and ensuring that everybody knows why it's being recorded, what it'll be used for, and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually one of the areas that the University of Queensland points to as being one of the enhancements that you can actually provide through telehealth, is that once you're in that digital space, you can do things that you wouldn't typically do in the clinic, of course with proper consent and with proper judgment as to when it's appropriate. But if you can, for example, record a scapulohumeral rhythm pattern and view it again in a few weeks, if the client's okay with that, you know, it's pretty hard to describe that in words sometimes. So if you can see it and see a comparison of it, that might be an enhanced version of care compared to in-person care.
Great. Do you find that in musculoskeletal population, the frequency of care in telehealth is less frequent, more frequent, or similar to that in face-to-face settings, given that manual therapy cannot be applied?
I'll jump at it, Natasha, if you want. And we're talking about musculoskeletal telehealth. Somewhat less. Again, it's hard to say one for everything. One, like, to address the question as a blanket statement, but probably in our practice right now, I would say somewhat less. There's, you know, obviously a few things with a few patients you wouldn't do that would augment what you're doing. Mostly you're doing active exercise, you're doing education, self-mobilization, these kind of things. And then when you can't do a few of the other things that you would do, those don't require quite as much of your time. So, but having said that, you know, when you can focus, really spend some time focusing on making sure someone's doing the exercises properly, making sure that there's a quality of movement that perhaps you don't spend as much time with in the clinic. You know, sometimes that does take time as well, and you can pretty easily do a couple sessions a week with someone that you're working with on those kind of things. So, Natasha, you may have other comments as well.
No, similar to you. I mean, so most of the manual that I do links in with my concussions, and so I find for me, my frequency for most of my clients remains the same. Whether it's for some of them, the sessions aren't as long for some of them, right? So I do have technology in my clinic that I would normally pop into a session to make their session 45 or 60 minutes. I'm not using that technology via telehealth, or some of that tech I've been able to assign as a home program on their tablet that I don't need to sit there and watch them do. So their session is 30 minutes instead of 45. But in terms of the manual piece, I am constantly guiding them through self-mobilization. If I don't sit there and guide them through 10 reps, however many sets, they don't do it. So if they were in the clinic, my hands would be on their neck doing that therapy. Via telehealth, their hands are on their neck doing the therapy, but the dosage and the intensity is the same in the session as it would be if they were in the clinic with me. But yeah, sometimes that appointment length is a little bit shorter, sometimes it's not. It just client to client.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we are getting close to the end of our time here, but I have one final question. PT services will be reopening in Saskatchewan early May, as per our health directives. There will be a transition period moving from social distancing to back to normal. What do you envision the transition taking? How do you envision the transition taking place? And are there aspects of practice that will be changed forever due to the pandemic?
Jeremy, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, there's certainly going to be a time period of hybrid care. I think there's going to be those people that we've been waiting to see that just weren't appropriate for telehealth that are going to need to come in. But there's going to be, I mean, the whole need for personal protective equipment, for the extra sanitization, for the risk that some people take in coming, especially the elderly and those vulnerable populations. They're going to be hesitant to come in. So we're going to continue with virtual care, I believe, and see some of those more in-person required visits start to come in. So I think that's going to be really important. I think there's going to be, as I said before, great leaps forward in the awareness of virtual services. So I think when you talk about and when you ask about how will we look at permanent changes, I think there will be some degree of hybrid that will be, virtual that will be a permanent hybrid, a mixed model of care that will be a lot more possible now going forward and in the future. So.
Yes, and there's a good point from the audience. It is important to point out that the guideline does emphasize continued emphasis on distance care. So yeah, so that hybrid will be really critical during that early transition period. Natasha, do you have thoughts or comments on this transition and things that will be forever changed due to the pandemic?
Yeah, so same thing. The hybrid model, I think, is, especially as you start to reopen your clinic doors, my thought process is start your clients as telehealth to determine, as that screening tool to determine whether they need to come in, right? So sometimes what comes through is what sound urgent. You can actually support via telehealth medium first, and then bring them into the clinic. So use that as a decide amongst yourselves and in your clinic how you're going to make this process, and make sure you have a process. Don't wing it client to client. So sit down with your client services team, sit down with your therapist, and decide, this is how we're going to reopen. This is the process we're going to follow. This is the flow chart the client experience will go through to determine whether they come into the clinic or whether they're going to be continued supported via telehealth. And make sure you communicate that as a team. Going forward, I do think this will permanently shift our practice, and I think in a really positive way. You've spoken to, and Saskatchewan's fairly, I don't know your province very well, but I'm fairly rural in some areas.
Rural, yes, definitely.
Yes.
We have a very large rural population.
Okay, so there's likely clinic owners that are watching this, or clinic owners that are not watching this, that their clients have traveled a significant chunk of time to come receive their treatments, and then looking at whether, if you adopt a hybrid model moving forward, does that actually better serve your clients? So if you're someone who moving forward, when we're more to regular practice, really does want to do those initial hands-on appointments, and that's your standard in your clinic, can you support them via telehealth for the next couple appointments before they have to come back and see you, to save them time, to save them cost, but still have you providing an excellent level of care? So I would encourage physiotherapists that when we get that okay to go back to normal, to really look at how you were delivering your services before, look at how this period did go for you with telehealth if you were practicing it, and is there a way to up your level of care even more with something like a hybrid system or so much such moving forward. So just open your brain to, I encourage you to open your brain to possibility of change, and see if there's a model that might better serve our profession and our patients.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And Greg, interested in your thoughts on this. What will change forever due to the experience that we have all gone through with the pandemic?
Something I think that will be interesting beyond the hybrid model is interprovincial clients. So right now you guys are in BC, and your clients, they're probably all within your geography and they can come to your clinic. But as this model goes on and this pandemic goes on, the propensity of you guys having clients from other provinces or other countries even increases. And that was a huge hurdle for us, and it still is in the licensing. So what we do is we license our therapists where they live and where the patient is. And then in BC specifically, if you see someone in BC, all of the data for that person has to be stored in BC. And a lot of the third-party apps that help you do practice management and so on don't store the data in BC. And there's you can get into some challenges there if you're not storing data where the client is, or each region and jurisdiction has the right to make policies around where data is stored. BC is probably the most stringent in Canada, and then in US there's different ones as well. So I think those things are going to impact your practice, where somebody's cousin gets referred to you and their cousin lives in Ontario, and this and that, and just be prepared for that. And as a profession in the US, where there's a lot of work to make it so it's if you're if you have a standard license in Colorado, you can practice in California instead of, like, a lot of our therapists will have 3 or 4 licenses, and it gets expensive and it's time consuming and so on. And to just make it have one license and every regulatory body holds hands on how that works. And as a profession, I think you guys are going to need to do that over the long arch of this curve over the next 3 to 5 years to help improve client care. Anyways, I'll yield on that point.
On that note too, just so people know, so in 2017, the 10 provinces signed an agreement saying that they will create a way for cross-border licensing. So right now, physical therapists can cross-border license into BC, Alberta, and Ontario and Quebec. Each province is responsible for setting up their own policy or process in which they allow that to happen. And then there's policies within like how you can access and use that cross-border license as well. But it's in the works. And I don't know, Jeremy, if you know if other provinces have come on board yet, but those are the ones that I know of.
I think it's the same. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that input. Okay, well, we have come to the end of our time. It went so fast. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the session, both audience, and special thanks to Jeremy, Natasha, and Greg. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences and insights, and really helping to answer a lot of unanswered questions. And it's really been extremely valuable for our physiotherapy community here in Saskatchewan. So special thanks to you for coming out.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right.